And are we gonna have a problem today? It's never taken this long in the history of doing this. Oh, well, it tells me on here that we are live, regardless of whether it is loaded. So I guess there are people already watching. It's all right if anyone has to leave for any reason. No, nobody ever has to tell me. They're totally fine. At the meantime, including for the people who are joining us online. So thank you for everyone who's joining us on YouTube this morning. We are here in Topeka getting ready to study the Talmud. Do we have any housekeeping we need to do today before we get started?
I think so.
Okay, that sounds great. Then I suppose we will start with the blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen, amen. And how much better in our wake of Shavuot, right? We've done all the Shavuoting at this point. We're done, but at the same time, it was a wonderful weekend of Torah. Holidays always seem to fall exactly when you need them to. We will usually anyway. We'll start. I'm not exactly sure where we left off. As you know, sometimes Safaria throws us around in the text. Um, this is a recap of something, though, that we covered in our last class. That if you had not yet prayed and you entered a synagogue and found that they were reciting the Amidah, if you're able to begin and complete it before the prayer leader reaches Modim Enach the Hodah blessing, then you should go ahead and start your recitation. And if not, you shouldn't. Better not to. And Yehoshua ben Levi says, in fact, if he's able to begin it before Kiddushan, not Modim Nalach, this is a good fence for you. You know, maybe move the bench even earlier so that you're not thinking you'll have enough time when maybe you won't. Which seems like a typical rabbinic fence, trying to protect you from the mistakes that you are likely to make as a human being. I know I'm fast. I can daven this out before he gets there, and then oops, okay, I'm a little late. I'll just stop. The rabbis don't want you to do that. They'd rather you not have started. It's like you go and have a conversation with the president. Okay, maybe not this. If you're not someone who, some, you know, whoever, some great. You go and let's say you're a sports fan. You go and you meet your sports idol. You're in the middle of a conversation, but it's even more than that because you're going before God, the King of the universe, and you're in the middle of a conversation in which you're having this conversation. I use the humans as an example because you can imagine going up to them and having a conversation, and then halfway through just stopping and walking away. It's like if I'm talking to Sam and I'm like, "Hey Sam, how's it going? I was thinking about this weekend. I might go," and I just leave. And it's like, that's rude as heck. Very rude. And you don't want to be rude to God, so better to not. Um, at least that's the opinion of the rabbis. Yeah.
I've read the Amidah has 18 parts.
19.
19. Did they recite all of them in those days? Or?
So
this is Orthodox, obviously.
well, I mean, so Orthodox isn't a concept that exists at this
that's what I mean.
At this time.
Yeah.
But as far as they are doing, and that means practice changes as it changes, but they're all just kind of they find out about it from other players. Like I mean, at this time especially, practice and stuff is in a lot of flux.
Sure.
So are all 19 blessings already there when this rabbi comments on it the first time when he actually says it out loud? I don't know. Maybe not. By the time it's codified, yeah, I think so. But that might not have been for hundreds of years late. You know what I mean? Like, so these practices, especially as they were being formed, grew over time. Which prayers you said, when you said them, what the liturgical calendar looked like. Not the big things from the Torah, not does Pesach exist, but like how do we sell, like for instance in the Talmud they're going to describe how you decide when you do Purim, whether it's first Adar or if there's a second Adar, you do it in second. You know, but like before we made the decision about that, different communities might have done that differently. They might have said, "Oh, there's two Adars, but we're still going to do it first Adar." Right? Not that they wouldn't have done it, but that they would have done it differently or at a different time. And then eventually the rabbi said, no, if it's, you got to move it, or you got to, depending on when you see the moon, you got to, because we don't know how we'll tell other people, better if you can't see the moon by this time, then, and there's a second Adar, then we move Purim to the, you understand? It's important for the standardizing of a religious, of the ritual life of the community, but didn't just pop into existence fully formed. I understand there are even those in the Orthodox world that, like, it's like the people who are like Yitzhak was, Isaac was like studying Gemara, and that's why he was so quiet, because he was the ideal yeshiva bucher, and he just studied all day and studied the Gemara and stuff. It's like Yitzhak, I'm sure, great guy, very smart, I'm sure. I just don't think he was studying the words of people who lived thousands of years after him. 1,500 years after him. I just don't.
Yeah.
I just don't think so. I personally, I don't think that. And also, I'm not denying Torah or anything. Nowhere in the Torah does it say that. You can. And so it's like this is the gradations of rabbinic authority. It's like by the time of the commentators, they don't have the right of the rabbis of the Mishnah and then Gemara to make like those kind of claims almost. We kind of believe that the closer we've got, the further we've gotten from Revelation, the less authority the generations have had to make changes. And quite frankly, that fear is part of why the orthodoxy is retrenched, I think, so much, and become so much more so much stricter, because there's this fear of, if we don't have the authority to make changes, maybe even recent generations haven't, maybe we should roll some stuff back so that we can make sure, you know what I mean? And then if there's a logic to that works, and with limiting principles, but there's also a version of it that doesn't have limiting principles, in which they just keep rolling up until they become Haredi. Nobody goes further back than that for some reason. We only ever go back like 300 years. Nobody ever goes back to like the communities of 800 years. No one's like, we must revive the Romanesque, liturgy, and there used to be a whole minhag of the Roman culture of Jews, like Sephardic and Ashkenazi, but it's been long gone. For hundreds of years we haven't had it, and so it just kind of nobody's trying to bring it back. Nobody says because it's even older than what we developed in Eastern Europe, it must be even more authoritative, and we must do that. Nobody says that, right? They do. It's interesting how we put a stopgap and say, obviously the most right, because even Shulchan Aruch was only a couple hundred years ago. Who's to say its authority really should? You know what I mean? Like, so, and the question is, but that might be too limiting. What I'm doing, because that is too limiting, quite frankly, in the sense that is somebody here trying to Harold? Hello? Oh, okay. Sorry, Alan. Okay. Alan Weissman is working in the kitchen. Harold I think, is away or something. I haven't seen him.
Harold,
I haven't seen him.
it is a beautiful day for golf.
Well, so it's a tough. It might be a tough weekend.
Join them later.
Well, it might be a tough weekend to get a tea time Memorial Day weekend. But in any event, in any event, all I'm saying is that this is the tension that has always been of trying to walk the middle path of Jewish life, of not overstraining, not doing too much, but not doing too little. And so it's over time we keep redefining where the boundaries between those terms are. And in this generation, we're a lot more machmir than we were about 70 years ago, when you had, in America about 70 years ago, There were, I think, maybe less than half of American Orthodox congregations had mechitza.
Mm.
Now I think it's like 99%. I've heard that the one that KI in Kansas City is the last one in the country that does it, but I can't verify that.
70 years ago was my bar mitzvah at an Orthodox synagogue. We had a
Well, Canada's always been more traditional than America.
Really?
By the way, that's true of Reform Judaism too. Reform Judaism today in Canada looks a lot more like conservative Judaism in America, just for the record. And that I think was even more staunch a while. I think they'd be liberalized in the time. So all I'm saying, like again, I'm using broad numbers, and anyone on the internet could easily, some of it is probably off by. I'm trying to pull numbers from a text I read in a class about American demographics, that I took 9 years ago or something. So please, please forgive any errors I make unintentionally. But my point being, we're in a different generation now. Now these things tend to yo-yo is what I mean. They tend to swing pendulum, right? So we're in a we could call it a rightward swing of the pendulum right now. But at some point, something will happen that will move, and will in all segments of Jewish life between Israeli, what's going on with Israel, with Israeli politics, and even with all of it. But at some point, the next generation will rebel against their religious parents and decide, like the one before, or something will happen. Honestly, I think that would have happened much more prominently had October 7th not happened, which I think for me too, I also am more retrenched and hardened than I think I was before. But I think that it did that for a lot of Jews in a way that will prevent again, it's not about liberal conservative, like it's not, I don't mean left right politically like that. I just mean like in the sense of like the Begin versus like merits, like a peacenik camp versus a using force strong backbone piece through strength kind of camp. And I think if there was any hope for like taking chances for peace or something, that probably has been stalled by, we're probably stalled over here for a while. Instead of swinging it all because October 7th, people love to, I hate to editorialize on something that's got nothing to do with what we're doing, but people love to talk about how, especially the Palestinians, but also any number of groups are radicalized by how they are treated by the world and by other people, by majority groups and whatever. The only group no one ever thinks gets radicalized by being murdered en masse, for instance, or being raped and having no one care at all about it, are the Jews, where we're expected to always be liberal peaceniks who will never resort to violence, will never be politically, exclusive, will never be nationalist or or put ourselves, or particularist even, to put ourselves first. We're never expected to do that. But every community in America otherwise is certainly expected to do that. Minority groups, absolutely. Sexual minority groups, same thing. Everyone's expected to look out for themselves and and the more bad things happen to them, for them to not, the Torah doesn't agree with any of that. The Torah says you as an individual are always responsible for your problems. And unfortunately, there are Jews that get radicalized by these kinds of, by both what happens to us and the world's reaction to it. Mm-hmm. So I pray that they like Bruria said to her husband, Rabbi Meir, we do not wish for the death of sinners, our own or other people's, but merely that they return and repent from their path of sinning, so that they will become good people with good hearts who don't wish anyone bad. And that's all we want for everybody, really. Doesn't sound that dastardly or complicated, but oh well. Okay. So we've got our fence here, and the Gemara clarifies with regard to what do they disagree, right? Well, we know that one is drawing a fence later. We can tell from the thing. The basis for the dispute is that one sage, Rav Huna, holds an individual is permitted to recite Kedusha on his own, so he need not insist on reciting it along with the prayer leader. And the other sage, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, holds that an individual may not recite Kedusha alone, and therefore is required to complete his prayer before the communal prayer leader reaches Kedusha. Here, that you have to have 10 to say Kedusha, or do you not? Right? Now, we think yes, right? Why? We did kind of cover this, but this was where we ended, I think, last week. So what, why? And anyone who's been, oh no, none of you were in my, oh, you're in my, Tuesday class. So we talked a little bit about this. What's the, why, when might you bow and things? What's about that, right?
You bow oftentimes at the beginning until the name of
Sure.
Adonai comes, and then you straighten up.
Absolutely. And in prayers that involve Kedusha,
Right.
right? And so the
Sure.
Kedusha is obviously one of those prayers.
Right.
And so we know the hint from the end because of what we do. Sometimes you'll know just from, if you know what we correctly do today, you're going to get the end of the story. You're like, okay, I see. If it's the one we do today, then that's probably the one that's going to win, right? Because you're like, okay, we do that. They must have won the argument. Similarly, Rav Ada bar Ahava stated, in accordance with the second opinion, from where is it derived that an individual may not recite Kedusha alone, as it is stated, and I shall be hallowed among the children of Israel, right? V'nikdashti betoch b'nei Yisrael.
Within you.
Right. Any expression of sanctity may not be recited in a quorum of fewer than 10. Yeah, but we don't believe that, but
Well, but they
put that in there so you know that's what they mean.
They didn't include women even.
Right, but they in the Hebrew, it's interesting only because if you read the Hebrew Aramaic bit here, right, it says kol davar shebikdusha lo yehe pachot me'asara. Right? So it says can't be done with less than 10. And that's why it says in the in the non-bold, because otherwise you're like, they're reforming my rights, right? You read it, you'd go, the rabbis clearly meant any 10 Jews. And of course, you'd get that wrong kind of in two ways also, because you might count kids. And you can't count them either. We, of course, count women, not kids. We don't count kids. We do count women. We don't count kids.
How does the children of Israel become defined as 10 or more instead of 2 or more?
That's a good question. But here we're going to get a explanation of it.
Okay.
Here is the literal answer to your question. The Gemara asks, the Gemara is literally Lorne. And the Gemara says, my mashma. So how am I supposed to understand that from this? How do I hear, literally more like, how do I hear that? Or in this case, how do I get from here to there? How is this inferred from that verse? Which in other words, right? Because they're basically asking what Lord is. They're saying, well, okay, children of Israel, but like children of Israel could be 4, right? Like, I mean, if we're talking the nuclear family, like it's really, we're talking 2 to 4, right? We're not really talking like 10. So how do we get there? And the Gemara says we've got a baraita for that. Don't worry about it. We got an answer for you. It comes from one of our baraitot, boom boom, which was taught by Rabbanai, which must be Rabbanai is like Ravnai is Detane Ravnai. Ravnai has to be my favorite. It's like Ragnar. I don't know. It's like what's the name of that from Rugrats? That it doesn't matter. Forget it. Ravnai is a great title. Ravnai is a great title. I'm sorry it's taken because I would have loved to steal it. Not steal, never steal. Anyway, I can't use it. It's in the Talmud. Right. I can't use it anyway. It's in the Talmud. It's a dead giveaway. Right. So, which was taught by Ravnai, the brother of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, who we've heard a lot from him. Maybe not so much from Ravnai at this point, but we know Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So now it's like, if you haven't heard of Ravnai, he's the brother of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So it is inferred, this is how we know. So Atya, it is inferred by means of a verbal analogy, a gezerah shava. Now, gezerah shava is one of those. Remember, I've told you before of the whatever 13 hermeneutical principles by which you can. Gezerah shava is one of them, which is when you use two words in different verses to prove why the meaning of one applies to the other. And it's part of the system of how you interpret. This is a great example because otherwise you can't just do what we do sometimes you'll see some people in our movement do where they're just like, and the Torah says, be nice to the stranger. And that's fine. I'd like to see some hermeneutics involved when you're going to make a theological argument based on the text, though. I'd like you to say, if you're talking about the stranger, talk about something else and which bring something else in. I'm not going to go into my whole thing about how I'd like to see them improve that, but the point being, here we're going to get a good one. So between the words among and among, toch and toch, right? Ketiv hacha. So here in one case it is written. In this one case it is written. V'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. We recognize that one, and I should be hallowed among the children of Israel. Uktiv hatam, and in the other place it is written. Hibadlu, might be hibodlu. Mitoch ha'edah hazot. So, and there regarding Korach's congregation, remember it was about when Korach got his band together to rebel against Moses. It is written, separate yourselves from among this Edah, this congregation. Just as in the second case, among connotes 10, which we know, we'll get into that at the bottom here. It's going to explain it to you more succinctly than I can. But just as in that one case, we know it means 10. So too, in this case. So what are we doing? We got the same toch. We got the same betoch in each verse. And we're saying because we're talking about a group in each one, and because we know that group is at least 10 in this case, we can then say that in this case, we say it means it has to be 10. So, and it says the connotation of 10, now to explain their proof for why that makes sense, the connotation of 10 associated with the word among, betoch, written in the portion of Korach, is in turn derived by means of another verbal analogy between the word edah, congregation, written there, and the word edah, written in reference to the 10 spies who slandered Eretz Yisrael. Remember when Caleb and Joshua were the only good ones and the other 10 slandered? They were called an edah. How long shall I bear with this edat rasha, right? This evil congregation of 10 spies. So that in that gezerah shava, they said, because of that, we know that the Korach thing is 10. And then we daisy chained essentially. And then we went over and we said, since that was true for here, it must also hold to be true here. But it's not, it was edah to edah, and then not only was edah here, but also toch was here in the second one. And so they took toch and jumped off of it, right? If it was just edah, they would have gone from the first one, but that didn't work because edah wasn't in this verse that we were looking at here about 10 for Kedusha, B'nai Yisrael, right? Only toch was. So we had the daisy chain to get from one to the second and then the second to the third. But do you see how there's a real solid, like, there's a system and a logical consistency to the process? It's not just, this text, I think, means this, and it makes me feel good. Yeah.
Okay.
Come back at me. Go ahead.
Part of the Gemara.
Right.
Okay. So, Toph was taken then originally from those spies, except for Caleb and Joshua.
Yeah.
But doesn't Toph appear in the Torah in other places?
Toph,
Where-
yeah. Lots of
May not
places,
be.
tons of places.
Yeah, where it may not be 10.
No, it's a lot more than 10 usually. Like, make me a sanctuary, so I will dwell among them.
Among, yeah.
The Shokanti Bitocham. That's the whole congregation. That's everybody. That's
Right.
hundreds of thousands of, 200,000 people, whatever it is.
So.
But we don't need to prove that it's 200,000 people. We only needed to prove that it was 10.
10 or
We're looking, it's a proof. Anyone who's a mathematician probably would understand this better than anyone who's a psychologist. But, sorry. But you're just looking for the proof that works. Nobody cares if there's a holistic, nobody cares. We're just looking for the proof that works. Because then we've done it. We can say that it works. And if it holds, it's really more engineering than it is philosophy. Please understand. We're building a structure of Torah. So we need engineering, not philosophy, because that'll collapse in on itself. They like to go into stories and they like that, but when it comes to halacha, how do we do this? The whole reason the Talmud exists is to answer the question of how do we do this? And then you can go further and say, in the context of post-destruction of the post-Korban Judaism, or in the historical context of X, or with the theological understanding that you can expand from there. The Talmud is the richest and deepest to be understood historical, a religious text there is, I believe. But at the same time, they're building something here. Anyway, so that's consequently we have proved. You could just put a little caret in there and write, we have proved among the congregation there must be at least 10, right? He's not saying it's exactly 10 and that whenever it says betoch it's always 10. He's just saying we prove that in this instance Bnei Yisrael means at least 10. Right? What's the old joke where it's like more than one or at least, I don't know, there's some, it's not that old. There's some joke that people recently said, that I heard people say a couple of years ago, where it was like, how many, this is more than one, I don't know. It's just like a really safe, we're setting a safe level here. I don't know. Anyway, so we made our proof and we'll live with it. And then we're just going to say, Udkule, Alma, right? And in any case, everyone agrees that one may not interrupt his prayer in order to respond to Kedusha. So nobody disagrees about that. So if you're praying and they're doing Kedusha, and you remember that in Kedusha there's supposed to be a call and response, Kadosh, right? It's like with Hatzi Kaddish, where there are parts that, like, two lines the leader does, and then a line they do, two lines they do together, and then a line that just the congregation does, and then remember it goes like that. Well, here too, it's there are parts that, like in Kiddushat Hayom, when you do the morning version, and it's much longer than what we do on Friday night, where we just say Atah Kadosh Shimcha Kadosh U'Kedoshim B'Chol Yom Yahalelucha Sela. It's the one that's Nikadesh Et Shimcha Ba'olam Et Shem Shemati Shimo Tobi Shmei Marom Kakatuv Al Yad Niviecha V'Kara Zel Zeh Ve'Amar, and then the congregation responds Kadosh Kadosh Kadosh, and goes up on their heels for each of those three, and then Adonai Tzivaot Velo Chol Haaretz Kivodo, and then the leader comes back in and goes Adir Adirenu Adonai Adonai, right? And it's great. I love the whole thing. But I won't sing the rest. I won't do the rest of the prayer for you. But the point of it is, because there's a response, they're saying, and in any case, everyone agrees that there's no disagreement. You cannot interrupt. If you get caught and you got to finish, you can't interrupt your prayer. So therefore, better to make sure you're done before it, right? Not that, well, who cares? Maybe you'll get. No, better to make sure you're done before it, because everyone agrees that one may not interrupt his prayer in order to respond to Kedusha, which you're supposed to do. Because you can't stop. If you're back in the Avot V'Imahot, or if you're in the Giverot and you're just catching up, right? You said, "Oh, I'll get right." Like if you can't, Or if you said, well, I just need to catch up by Modi Menach Nulach, which was the first guy's opinion, much later in the Amidah, especially if it's a weekday. And so you start when they are starting Kiddusha, you can't respond because you're not allowed. If you're still praying Avot V'Imahot and Givorot, you can't. Anyway, yeah.
And it isn't okay to continue your prayer and come to Kedusha later.
Right, no.
Okay,
No, because you need 10.
yeah,
So nobody can go back and do it with you, is the
Yeah.
thing, because they've already said it.
that's right.
So you gotta do it all together. That's the thing. Now, again, sometimes if you're doing like a mincha minyan at a conference, like I've done before, and like we get together specifically to say, like we might wait for people in order so that we, like before we start the next day, so that we can make sure that that everyone can keep up, and so that everyone can say the things they need to say, so that we can, but in a congregational setting, that probably won't happen. Okay. However, a dilemma was raised before the sages of the yeshiva. What is the ruling? Is one permitted to interrupt his prayer in order to recite? Right. May his great name be blessed in Kaddish. I won't go through the thing. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, which is also interesting because he's named Rav Dimi, so he must be known more for being in Babylonia than for being in Eretz Yisrael. So he must have gone there to study, is my assumption, because he became Rav in Babylonia. He didn't become a rabbi in Eretz Yisrael, or he'd be Rabbi Dimi, which he's not. He said, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, disciples of Rabbi Yochanan, important to say because Rabbi Yochanan is one of the big. Again, whenever you've got to tie some zechut to a big name, that's good for you. People will automatically, right? Theoretically, we're not supposed to have this. Is supposed to be all meritocracy, but the rabbis do, and even today, I would say the Orthodoxy still has this, and I would say ultra-Orthodoxy even more, has like an aristocracy within it, where the leading families of the leading rabbinic families of different movements, and also their students in many cases. So I mean, there's some they had to accept them as it's not like a random person, but like get extra. Just for having been a student of that particular Rav. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, by the way. I'm just trying to give you some color, as I understand.
That's rather typical. They do that in the Freudian circles too.
Well, I mean, there you go. So disciples of Rabbi Yochanan said, one may not interrupt his prayer for anything except for may his great name be blessed. So this right? It's right. It's where it says right. Yehi Shmo Hagadol Nevarah.
Okay.
Right. So we say it in various prayers. Like in the Kaddish, right? As even if one was engaged in the exalted study of the act of the if in Maaseh Merkavah, the divine chariot or the big flaming chariot that Eliyahu goes up in from Ezekiel, he stops to recite it. However, the Gemara concludes the halacha is not in accordance with his opinion. So this guy shows up and he said, "Hey, in Eretz Yisrael, we did it this way," and they go, "Shut up! Nobody cares about it. They do in Eretz Yisrael."
As you say, majority rules.
And also, it's majority rules, and Babylon has the juice. I don't know how to say it other than that, really. Babylon's the place with the money and the power. Kind of like, I don't know how to say it. It's kind of like today with American Jewry is really, even though Israeli Jewry at this point is even a little bit larger, maybe. Maybe they have the juice now, but up until about a decade ago, it was pretty well bitter by Israelis that it was felt by some that American Jewry is really where the juice was. Not necessarily, if not in like Udvar Danai Yerushalayim, like if not like in the religious sense, then in the cultural power sense, right? We had Hollywood, and so we were represented on Broadway, and like so we were culturally really dominant. Nowadays, I'd actually say that's probably shifted, and the cultural weight also with music and art and movies comes from Israel and not from American Jews who tend to make stuff that's so secular and stupid, honestly, that at this point it does like Seth Rogen's American Pickle, which was a family drama, and it wasn't terrible as a family drama, but it wasn't a Jewish movie, really. It's just about a Jewish guy. Um, it's really not a Jewish movie. You can't just throw in a reference to pogroms and in Eastern Europe and say, if you haven't seen it, it's fine to watch. I'm just saying. I think 20 years ago, people might have still said the juice was here. I think now the juice is probably there.
For Jews, not for all of them.
No, Americans don't care about what comes out of Israel for the most part. But for Jews, American Jews, yeah, I think it's shifted. What was the other? Yeah. Same thing here with Babylon it's like 1970s, Israel versus America, right? Really, the dichotomy. Israel is still a pioneer nation, struggling to make sure that water is good for everyone and that they can get TV channels on the air and maybe import a car one day. No, it's by that time it's a little better than that. I'm talking that's the 50s really. That the 50s is also a great example as Jews start to, emerge from the blacklists of, communism and stuff to Israel still really struggling. It was a different situation then. Anyway, the halacha is not in accordance with those Eretz Israel rabbi opinions. We learned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda says, with regard to one who experiences fun, a seminal emission. Sorry, internet, please don't ban me. He recites a blessing beforehand. How can one recite a blessing beforehand? If it's accidental, I don't know how you do that. And afterward, at least that's possible, in both the case of Shema and in the case of food. Okay, I don't. The Gemara asks, is that to say? The Gemara is like, we are confused. Hold on, you're not the only one confused. The Gemara is confused. It says, is that to say that Rabbi Yehuda holds that one who experienced the seminal emission is permitted to engage in matters of Torah? So you should understand Rabbi Yehuda says he recites a blessing beforehand and afterwards is that he's allowed to say Shema and bless food and whatnot. He's not made impure in a way that prohibits him from blessing by this happening to him. And the Gemara is asking, is that what you mean? Do you mean that it doesn't make him impure from saying these things because it wasn't his fault, right? Like that's what we're asking. So it's like, is that what you mean? Didn't Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi say, from where in the Torah is it derived that one who experiences an emission is prohibited from engaging in matters of Torah? As it is stated, just take heed and guard your soul diligently, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart for all the days of your life. And you shall, again, remember, this is Deuteronomy 4, so what is it referencing here? Where we're crossing the seminal emission problem with what? Remember that you've seen Revelation, right? Remember all the things you've seen at the mountain and whatnot, right? That's what Moses is in Deuteronomy 4. We've gotten the rest. We've gotten the Shema again. We've gotten this is for the Torah service. It's saying remember that you have seen things that should make it impossible for you to think this is all just a story. Of course, today we failed that mission because most people think it's a story, but the Torah specifically says so we're crossing those moments somehow, which seems really weird to me. Just to me, maybe. Right. From which we derive, among other things, the obligation to study Torah, because you shall impart them to your children and your children's children. And juxtaposed to it is the verse, So that was 4:9, and the next verse is the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb. This juxtaposition teaches us that just as below, at the revelation, again, I was telling at the revelation at Mount Sinai, those who experienced a seminal emission were prohibited and were commanded to refrain from relations with their wives and immerse themselves in a mikvah. So too here, throughout the generations, those who experience a seminal emission are prohibited from engaging in Torah study.
Until mikvah.
Right, until they go to the mikvah.
Right.
That's so weird. It's like, just like, wait, did this happen to guys at the moment of revelation? What was happening at the moment of revelation? Like, I don't even want to know. It's not for me to know, and it's not for me to bother with, but that's what I didn't write it. I'm just saying.
I'm not sure I'm understanding or following this correctly.
Okay.
The first part is saying, even if you have a seminal admission, you can say Shema and the blessings. The second part is saying, no, you can't. You've got to go to the mikvah.
So the first part is we learned. So there was a Mishnah. The Mishnah might have been wrong. They've decided. So there was a Mishnah where Rabbi Yehuda, who's one of the big guys,
Right.
says they recite a blessing beforehand and afterwards when they experience that. And the Gemara is saying, is he saying that they can engage in matters of Torah? And maybe he's not saying that, but the Gemara just comes in to say, is he saying that that people who experience that can immediately engage in matters of Torah? He might not be saying that, but they're saying he can't.
He can't.
Now, Rabbi Yehuda may not be saying that because there's lots of latitude for what he could be saying. He could say they say that because they must first go to a mikveh immediately. It could be a command about how quickly you have to go to the mikveh. Remember, the commands are not always direct in rabbinic world. Sometimes you give a command that's totally unrelated because the process you have to go through in order to follow it out is the important thing that you have to do. Like in this case, that's what I mean when I say it could mean you must go to the mikveh immediately, even though we never talked about the mikveh. Yeah.
Where do you find a mikveh in the desert? These people are in Mount Sinai. Where did they find a mikveh?
Well, they had the red heifer juice that they could, where they mixed up water with the ashes of the red heifer and poured it over people. They had other ways. And remember, before we entered the land of Israel, there's a lot of different religious rules about sacrifice, there's a lot of things that are not yet fixed and that change when we build the when Solomon builds the temple.
Yeah, that's quite a time. Quite a time after entering Israel, you got
well, but different things change over time, right? Yeah. The last thing to change is sacrificial worship at the temple, but other things change as we get there. When we're wandering in the desert, that's our honeymoon period. Remember, a lot of the rules are way different, really lax. Like nobody has to worry about kashrut because they're just eating manna. So
right.
They're not even playing. They're playing the game on easy mode at that point, and that's the point. They're being eased into it. But so God's got a plan for that. But the point being, they weren't like Revelation. Be orthodox. Like it wasn't like that. Like it was a long time that we had to build up traditions and rules and even the rules that were in the Torah were not incumbent upon them immediately. Right. Okay. So and then we said in juxtaposed to it is that, so they're prohibited. And if you say that Rabbi Yehuda does not derive homiletic interpretations, so here we're talking again about the hermeneutic techniques to interpret. And so if you're saying he doesn't go with this he doesn't agree that this is one of the ways you can do that. If he doesn't derive homiletical interpretations from juxtaposed verses, which is a legitimate, he can't say that. But if you were to say he says that, didn't Rav Yosef already say, even one who does not derive homiletical interpretations from juxtaposed verses throughout the entire Torah, nevertheless derives them in Deuteronomy, in Mishneh Torah, the repetition of the Torah. Why do they call it that? Because it's Moses' speech in which at the beginning he essentially lays out very quickly you were slaves in the land of Egypt, and your patriarchs wandered. Your father was a wandering Aramean, and they came to the land of Egypt where they were enslaved, and God brought you out of the house of bondage in order to be a holy people and a nation of priests, right? We get that. That's the beginning of Deuteronomy, essentially. So that's why they call it that. So it says, nevertheless, that person still derives them in Deuteronomy, still believes in that in Deuteronomy. Everyone has to. As Rabbi Yehuda does not derive homiletic interpretations from juxtaposed verses throughout the entire Torah, and he does derive them in Mishnah Torah, in Deuteronomy. They call Deuteronomy Mishnah Torah here. That's what they're calling it. But because again, we just decided at some point to call all the books by their first major word, right? Bereshit, Shmot. Shmot just means names. Why is it Exodus? No reason. Just the first major word. These are the names of the generations, right? So the Shmot, Vayikra, and God called for Leviticus, Bamidbar in the desert for Numbers, and Devarim, words. These are the words that Moses spoke to the children of Israel. The introduction to his speech. Now, words, I guess, is a pretty good title, but Deuteronomy means essentially the second telling. So, hence. Mishneh Torah is a pretty good actual translation of it, but Devarim or Deuteronomy works too, if you prefer.
I may be way off track, but for some reason Mishneh Torah brings up the name Maimonides.
Yeah, because Maimonides, yes, no, you're right. Yeah. Mishneh Torah, because also remember that it says in Deuteronomy that remember that there's a rule in the Torah. Deuteronomy, I'm not sure if he repeats it or not. It's also earlier. That says a king, I think it also is in Deuteronomy, but that a king has to write a Mishneh Torah, a copy of the Torah, for themselves to guide them.
Right.
And that's a praiseworthy thing for a king to do. So from the idea of that, Maimonides writes the Mishneh Torah, which is the first law code, essentially, in which he says, we're going to take the Talmud, we're going to organize the rules, and we don't need the Agadah. It's very nice. We can keep it in Sefer Agadah and other books of legends, and it's obviously in the original text. If you just read the Talmud, it's in there. But we don't need it for the purpose of looking up rules, because Jews need to not just read the whole Talmud, they need a rule book. They need someone to be able to look through it and say, what do we do in this case? Okay, well, let's turn to this section of law, right? Like any law code, and not just say, where do we find it? Well, it's written in these 7 books, no, let's pull it all together. So he writes Mishneh Torah, which is the first law code, and that's pretty much why he gets one of the reasons he gets excommunicated, because the idea at the time, it's crazy to us today because everyone's especially Orthodox and Maimonidean for the most part, regular Orthodox today, that at the time, the traditionalists were like, no, rabbis make the decisions, communities are different, that's okay. It can be a little, adjustable by community, and we're not gonna say that everyone has to do everything just one way. There's a little bit of leeway there. Not that it was reform, not that Maimonides made it so they weren't Reformed Jews, right? It's not like that. It's just I'm sure they were even more traditional in different ways, or different at least in conservative ways or whatever. But Maimonides' idea that we should have a code and everyone should follow this one way of doing, was not well received at first, and later on people said, well, again, the problem becomes over time, and we're seeing this fracture in American Judaism right now, where the more different we become from each other, the more the desire or the need seems to be for us to kind of, to kind of pull it back together a little bit. Because otherwise, like good meatballs, if they don't have enough, and they have too much binding, they suck. And if they have, they're too stiff, and that's not good. But if they have too little, they fall apart. And that's also not good, because then we lose a whole chunk of them, and there's much fewer of us. So we got to try to find a way to not keep us like a fist, but to find a way for us to kind of be together. And so that was the way we decided to do it. And we wrote, there were more law codes after Maimonides, but that was that Mishnah Torah. But Mishnah Torah, because Mishnah originally, remember, Mishnah like Mishnah, Mishnah can mean a teaching, it can also mean a copy. And that's where like Mishaneh, like from the other Hebrew word, so it's like the same thing, right? So it can also be copy, which is where we get the idea of like you should write, the king should write a copy of the Mishnah Torah, a copy of the Torah for himself, not the king should write Maimonides' law code for himself, which it does not mean. Okay, so we said even he derives it, he has to derive them in Deuteronomy. But wait, and from where do we derive that Rabbi Yehuda? First of all, this guy just said that he doesn't derive it. We said maybe he doesn't. Do we know that he doesn't? And from where do we derive that Rabbi Yehuda does not derive homiletic interpretations from juxtaposed verses throughout the entire, right, in the first 4 books, or anywhere but Deuteronomy? Okay, and here's your answer. As it was taught in a Baraita, with regard to the punishment of a sorceress, Ben Azai says, it is stated, you shall not allow a sorceress to live. Love that guy. Although the manner of her execution is not specified, and it is stated, whoever lies with a beast shall surely be put to death. The fact that the Torah juxtaposes this matter to that, these two matters, was to say, just as one who lies with a beast is executed by stoning, so too a sorceress is executed by stoning.
Oh, that's
right. So again, we just needed to prove the method. Think of it like, again, math. I hate to do this to you, but remember when you were taught to solve, I need like a thing, but when you were taught to solve fraction variable equations, you would have like 9x over 7 equals 3 over 5, right? And you'd have to multiply the 9x times, right? You'd have to do that, and then you do the cross multiplication, and that would give you the proper equation so that you could solve for x, right? That's essentially what they're doing with the juxtaposing, Herman, with this. Unlike the last one you were taught, where they're comparing words and they're lining them up, and then they're taking values and matching them across. This is a different one, but it also is a concept that makes sense, where we're taking we're not doing this, we're doing this. We're cross multiplying them, and we're saying if there's a value, as long as they, right? So they're both involving death. There's no word in common, but they're both involving being executed. And one says a method, we get in Leviticus, we don't get in Exodus 22, but we get later a proof that, which is Leviticus 20, that the method of execution is stoning. So because we've now juxtaposed these two lines with similar theme, we can now say that the method of execution for a sorceress is the same. And again, it works because there are 2 consecutive verses. You shall not allow, this is 22:17 and 22:18, right? It's not just 2 verses anywhere, they're consecutive. This idea of you shall not allow a sorceress to live, and whoever lies with a beast shall surely be put to death. They're next to each other, so it makes sense that whichever punishment applied to one would apply to the other. So when we find out the punishment of one, we can immediately say that it applies. We are basically saying that it applies to the other one because of their proximity, right? And so now there's 13. So or maybe more. I might be getting the number wrong. So there's a bunch, right? There's less than 20. That much I know, but like there's so like this is just 2, but like but in any event, they're you're right. Yeah.
Is another of them, if it applies here, so much more so?
Yeah, right. Al kama v'kama is what it's called. And it means if this is true, how much more so should it apply to something of greater or lesser, or how much less should it apply to something of lesser importance, right? So that's the measurement there is relative importance, not proximity or matching words, but that one is relative importance.
Okay.
So each one has a lever essentially that determines its essential function. And for that one, it's relative importance. People love that one. They use it all the time.
Mhm.
It's maybe one of the most popular ones. Because Shava is maybe the most popular, where you do the two words. But after that, it's probably Alachat Kama V'Kama, often called Kal V'Chomer.
Yeah.
And that's also one, but that's a Kal V'Chomer is the general understanding that there are lightnings and some things are light and some things are heavy. Oh man, I really should pull this up and not do this off the top of my head because I'm gonna be such a jerk.
No, that's
about
okay.
it.
That's fine. I love the reasoning.
Can't see the guy. Okay. Kal V'Chomer. Right. If a rule applies in a light case, it must all the more so apply in a heavier case. But alachat kama v'kama allows it to go both allows you to go both ways.
Yeah, okay.
Right. So the basic logic, right? Establish that a premise is true in a less critical or more difficult situation. If this situation is true in A, how much more so is it true in B? Right. So Miriam is punished by being shut out of the camp for 7 days. God says, if her father had butt spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? The logic implies that if an earthly father's rebuke warrants 7 days, all the more so does a rebuke directly from God.
Yeah.
Right? Every day. If I'm too tired to walk across the street, Kal V'Chomer, I am too tired to run a marathon.
If I'm too sick to go to school, I can't go to the party afterwards.
Okay, so alachat kama v'kama is just the phrase you use to exemplify the method, which is kal v'chomer. They're basically it's the same thing, essentially. The alachat kama v'kama is what you say. Sorry, because that means how much more so. Literally for one, how much more and more. But in English, right, it translates as all the more so, or how much more so. So it's just basically the same thing. But yeah, it's kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer. Okay. Oh no. Okay. So with regard to this proof, Rabbi Yehuda. Oh wait. Right. Rabbi Yehuda said to him about this juxtaposing, and does the fact that the Torah juxtaposed this matter to that warrant, juxtapose this matter to that one in the two lines, warrant taking this person out to be stoned? Should he be sentenced to the most severe of the death penalties on that basis? Rather, the source is mediums and wizards were included among all sorcerers. And why were they singled out from the rest? In the verse, and a man or a woman who is a medium or a wizard, right, a soothsayer is often we call that too, shall be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood is upon them. In order to draw an analogy to them and say to you, just as a medium and a wizard are executed by stoning, so too is a sorceress executed by stoning. So in other words, he's saying it's not about that. You should be doing thematic links, right? You should be saying we have a place where literally the same people are being described, just men, right? Sorcerers and wizards and soothsayers.
Mhm.
Well, they're the same thing essentially. We should learn not from just the two things next to you can do that. It's one of the ways, but he says, but you shouldn't do that there. He doesn't believe it's one of the ways. Instead, you should just take the thematic link to this other, to something else nearby, which is in the holiness code, which is about the other people like them, and use their penalty, which is the same. Like it's like he's like you're being stupid. I think there's a better way to do it. Is what he's saying. So they're saying that's how you know. By the way, this was all an answer to how do you know he doesn't do juxtapositions outside of Deuteronomy? Because here's an example of him rejecting one in Leviticus and Exodus, right? Because he says, no, you can't do that. But then here so now we go, okay, because we stated that he doesn't do it outside of Deuteronomy, but that he does do it inside Deuteronomy because everyone does. So now we've proven that he doesn't do it outside Deuteronomy. And now, how do we know that he does it in Deuteronomy? As it was taught in another Baraita, thank God, Rabbi Eliezer. We know Rabbi Eliezer is a big. Remember, the halacha in every case follows Rabbi Eliezer.
He's always right.
Right? Rabbi Eliezer said, even though the rabbis sometimes overrule him anyway, we know that God thinks he's always right, which is always good to know because rabbis, especially like Haredi rabbis, will come up to you and say, we're telling you what God wants. It's like, well, you're telling us what the rabbis want. We know for a fact from the rabbis that sometimes what God wants and what the rabbis want aren't the same thing. You're doing it for a good reason, you believe, which is fine, but we don't hold by that because we'd rather do what God, right? We're people of God. We're not people of the rabbis necessarily. That's why, rabbis in other traditions get, not that I'm not complaining about my level of honor. I'm just saying, there's different levels of honor in every tradition, and Reform is not at the highest level, but it's also because we're not you're not coming to me asking, Rabbi, how do I do this? And now I have to give you the answer, and that's how you'll do it the rest of your life, right? Like we're not doing that together. We're doing this. So I'm a teacher more than
Lawgiver.
right, a judge for your lives, right? Right. So, uh-oh. So Rabbi Eliezer, so as it was taught in another writer, Rabbi Eliezer said that a man may wed a woman raped by his father and one seduced by his father. A woman raped by his son and one seduced by his son. Though one is prohibited by Torah law from marrying the wife of his father or the wife of his son, the prohibition does not apply to a woman who had sex with them. Just take this, please, as I don't want to say the word anymore. So just take this as a woman who has sex outside of wedlock. Right? Let's just take it as that. These are the two conditions the rabbis can imagine that a woman would have sex outside of wedlock. She was either forced or seduced. It's not, please don't take it as this is what the rabbis are hoping for. So they're like, please. They're just saying in a condition where the Torah would say you can't marry the wife of your father or your son, but if it's just a woman who at one point had sex with your father or son outside of wedlock, that is acceptable for marriage. If we're not doing the moral weight here, if they did the rape thing, they get killed. They get stoned to death. That's done. So we're not here saying this is good. I'm just putting out, like, we're not here saying, well, if this just happens to happen, as it does. That's not what they're saying, just for the record. They would still punish, if the father or son did that, you wouldn't have a father or son, because he'd be dead.
Wouldn't the woman be too?
Depends. If it's attestable that she was forced, then
She wouldn't.
no. Look, the answer of the rabbis mostly is they don't really put people to. No, she probably wouldn't be. But they could stop her from getting mad. That they would do. Put to death, they didn't usually have. It's not that they didn't even want to. I'm not saying whether they just didn't have the authority to put people to death for most of the time, right? If they live under Roman, they can't put people to death.
I see.
They don't have this. The rabbinic court rarely had the authority to put people to death. They did have the authority to deny ketubot, to deny marriages and divorces and stuff, and they still do. So they have other court duties that can throw wrenches into people's lives, but at this point they can't really impose that penalty anyway. Not that again, though, right? This is just about the category to teach you a lesson. It's a dugma, an example in a textbook, not for you to morally wrestle with. Is what I'm asking you to just leave the moral thing aside for a moment, if you can imagine it. And Rabbi Yehuda prohibits him from marrying a woman raped by his father, and so a woman who had consensual or unconsensual sex with the father if they were not married. And Rav Gidl said that Rav said, "What is the reason for Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that he prohibits him from marrying?" Right? Rabbi Eliezer allows it, and Rabbi Yehuda prohibits it. And Rav Giddel said that Rav said, what is the reason for Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? As it is written, a man shall not take his father's wife and shall not uncover his father's clothing, right, skirt. The last expression, shall not uncover his father's skirt, implies that a skirt that has been seen by his father. His father doesn't wear a skirt, is what they're saying. It's a skirt that has been seen by his father. So it's not just, the Deuteronomy is not just using that method in Deuteronomy. It doesn't just mean someone who is married to your father or son, but it's anyone who had sexual relations of any kind with your father or son. And he does that using the juxtaposition from Deuteronomy. So we know that he does that in Deuteronomy. And that's all we brought this story up to say. Right? Right? Any woman in sexual may not be uncovered by his son, i.e., his son may not marry her. Right? And from where do we know that the verse is written with regard to a woman raped by his father? As the previous section juxtaposed to it deals with the laws of rape. And the man who lay with her must give her father 50 shekels because he has violated her. That too. At any rate, we see that in Deuteronomy, right? They're saying, look, they're like, we don't want to have the conversation right now about the rest of it. We just want to, at any rate, we see that in Deuteronomy, Rabbi Yehuda derives homiletic interpretations from juxtaposed verses, which is what we came here to prove. Why does he fail to derive that one who experiences a seminal emission is prohibited from engaging in matters of Torah from the juxtaposition of verses? They replied, indeed, in Mishnah Torah, in Deuteronomy, Rabbi Yehuda does derive them from the juxtaposition of verses, but he requires these juxtaposed verses in order to derive another statement of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. As Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, one who teaches his son Torah, the verse ascribes to him credit, as if he received the Torah from Mount Horeb. As it is stated, and you shall impart them to your children and your children's children. Which brings us back to chapter 4, verse 9. After which it is written, the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Mount Horeb. Right? Those two verses are there. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda cannot derive from that same juxtaposition a prohibition banning one who experienced a seminal emission from engaging in matters of Torah, because he's already done one with that verse. And I guess you can't double dip. No double dipping. Oh my God, this is such a long sugya. Okay, we'll come back to this next time. I'm gonna call it. Tap out. Thank you everyone on YouTube. We appreciate you.